Hi, welcome to the September Agriculture and Forestry Team monthly call. I will turn it over to Susan Olson to introduce our speaker, Susan Massino. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm proud to introduce Dr. Susan Massino, Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at Trinity College, Hartford. Her professional and personal passion is pursuing opportunities to promote and restore brain health. In addition to her neuroscience research, she applies an interdisciplinary lens to public policies that support and improve brain health, and she finds a natural ally in intact forest ecosystems. She has co-authored a seminal paper promoting the benefits of protecting and growing existing forest as intact ecosystems which benefit the planet with maximal carbon sequestration, ecological, and structural diversity, while at the same time promoting personal and community health, a concept called proforestation. Her subject today, forest and well-being.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that wonderful introduction. And I wanted to let anyone know, if you happen to be near Simsbury, Connecticut, I want to make an advertisement for a Beaver Pond Wildlife film series that we're having this week on Thursday at my Grange. So a little bit more background about me and kind of the different things that I've been involved in. All of the things that I do in the community and in my work is all organized around the themes of brain health and kind of health for everyone. And I really started to delve much more deeply into this when I did a research fellowship at Harvard a few years ago that was a joint venture between Harvard Forest and Harvard Medical School, with a professor that had done a lot with forest botanicals and in making new medicines. I want to mention that I'm a board member of the Pinchot Institute, and also a county coordinator in the Old Growth Forest Network. I'm a very proud Grange member, involved in that in my community and other community-based efforts. And I was also the co-chair of the Science and Technology Working Group for the Phase 1 report of the Governor's Council on Climate Change in Connecticut. And so I'm mentioning all this just to let you know that I've been looking at this from a lot of different perspectives, talking to people in a lot of different disciplines, in addition to my own training with a PhD in biology, and being at a very interdisciplinary liberal arts college. And that's one of my kind of take-home messages, that these are issues that require very, very interdisciplinary conversations so that we can move forward with a combination of really of science and compassion and the best future for everyone. So my two bottom line messages, one is that we need nature. Whoops. Oh, sorry. And the other is that we really need healthy brains. And my training in biology and as a neuroscientist has really given me a very, very deep appreciation for the evolution of these very complex dynamic systems and how much we don't know about these very complex dynamic systems. We don't know all the molecules that are involved. We don't know how they interact. We don't even know what all the species are in these complex ecosystems. So that's one sort of take-home message. And these two things are irreducibly important: the need for natural systems and the need for healthy brains. So related to the importance of making these strategic decisions, I've sort of divided, landscape decisions related to well-being into three buckets. We need natural processes. We need more research. There's so much we don't understand. And of course, we need ongoing resources. So these are three things that are somewhat overlapping. And you can imagine that we need more research on nature. We also need more research on, resource use. So While these things are overlapping, there are some areas where they don't overlap. So we need to think about nature as like, what is our essential lifeline of natural systems where we need to adopt sort of a first do no harm medical ethic. In terms of research, one of the most important things we need, as I said, is more data collection and, to continue to evolve our definitions of what is wise use. And then in terms of resources, we really need to think for our best future about local, circular, and sustainable systems where we're using our resources for their highest and best use. And these are some of the ideas that I spoke to Randy Moore about at the U.S. Forest Service. Recently, the Pinchot Institute signed a historic memorandum of understanding. And Gifford Pinchot was actually born in my town in Simsbury, Connecticut. And one of he's often known as for wise use, but he has a really prescient quote for the long term, which is the forest comes first. So the thing that I've focused on is the lack of a plan for the first essential piece. Where are we simply prioritizing natural processes? It doesn't mean we can't keep people safe. It doesn't mean we don't welcome people, but it means we should have a first do no harm attitude. And in terms of natural processes, we have small pieces, but we have no strategic plan. And this is a real concern for me as a scientist. And more disciplines are really converging on the need for this as essential to stabilizing the climate and maintaining the ecological integrity that's essential for everything that we need. So it's time to make some critical decisions about where and why should we prioritize nature. And some of you may have heard of a first ever kind of regional report called Wildlands in New England, Past, Present, and Future. I'm a co-author in this report, and it basically documents where are the areas in New England that are prioritized for natural processes, and the term for that intent is wildlands. And in the report, we defined wildlands as tracts of any size and current condition that's protected from development, where management is intended to prioritize natural processes with minimal human interference. So, of course, if there's a problem and we know how to fix it, if there's a safety issue, erosion, all of those things could be addressed. It doesn't ban those things, but it's just saying this is sort of an area that we're prioritizing for natural processes. And it also acknowledges that humans have been part of nature for millennia, and we can coexist without always manipulating natural systems. So some of the clear benefits of these wildland areas are the benefits for climate stability, preventing extinction. The data shows that basically intact protected areas can have cut in half the rate of extinction. These are important areas for individual and community health and a real repository of evolution, adaptation, and resilience. I didn't insert a lot of it into my talk today due to time limits, but there are a lot of medicines and molecules that we've gotten from very specialized sort of niches, certain elevations, certain habitat niches, and the ability to find those medicines and molecules relies on letting these natural systems evolve and function. And I've really come to appreciate that evolution has solved so many biological problems. And we, and I know this because I grew up, I guess, in, pharmacology and biomedical research. We are so smart at, doing things, going to the lab and, putting molecules together and all of that. But one small vignette from Stephen Schachter, who I worked with at Harvard, is the molecule that he extracted from a tiny club moss. He sent it to the epilepsy lab in Utah. to test that molecule. And this is a lab that tests all kinds of compounds that are made by labs all over. He'd sent other, molecules. A lot of people send molecules there for testing. This had never happened before. When he sent that there, it's all blinded. They called him and they said, "What did you send us? This is the most powerful thing we have ever tested." So I have a real humility toward the things that we literally haven't discovered yet, or tested or understood their power. And the other thing that I think we often maybe someone just put something in the chat about nature positive. Yes, thank you. One of the things that I think we should not discount or underestimate is the ability to connect across generations to the mystery and the beauty of life on Earth. We need mystery, we need beauty, and this is kind of one of the fundamental things about being a human and having our big brains, is appreciating that and sharing it with others. So I want to kind of take a historic perspective on these essentials, and just note that indigenous cultures around the world always have some sacred areas. They're often where the medicine person or the shaman might be. So they've recognized the importance for these kind of sacred places on the landscape. And this was also a really fundamental value of Frederick Law Olmsted, who just celebrated his bicentennial in 2022. He was interested in making sure that people in urban areas had access to kind of wild nature, and also on the landscape in terms of national parks. And his vision was one of the founding principles for the national parks, that urbanization and our current society wears down our battery, and nature is a way to recharge your battery, and that this is something that everyone should have access to. So mental health was one of the primary motivators behind Frederick Law Olmsted, who's responsible for so many incredible parks and national parks and landscapes across the country. This is just a picture of a beautiful old forest 125 years ago, the 10-Mile Woods. This is where Frederick Law Olmsted grew up, in Hartford, Connecticut. And now it's an amazing old urban forest. And one trip there with a few experts, we found 5 specimens of 5 tree species that have been added to the notable tree database in Connecticut. There's just so much there we haven't discovered. And people that live near there, which is a very challenged neighborhood, they call it the magic forest. As another example that this has been a value through history and is a kind of value for evidence-based medicine, Henry Thoreau talked about this, that every town should have a park or a forest of hundreds of acres where it's just a common possession forever for instruction and recreation, and for people to just fall in love with. And I've found that that's something that people really care about and want to have as a place that they can count on. And I know from being a college professor that this is something that young people desperately want and need as things become more stressful on a number of accounts. And it's also something that's a value that's across all political stripes, ages, cultures, etc. So it's a way for us to come together and reduce the divisiveness that's, unfortunately present at multiple levels. And I just want to give a quick shout out also to Rachel Carlson, who really started to impress upon us that the natural world was not an inexhaustible font, and the dangers of the chemicals that we were putting into the natural world, and now the interactions among all of those chemicals. And it's still, the natural world is still facing that assault, and we need places that are free of that assault. And Rachel also talked about the power of wonder. So she's known for talking about pollution and poisons, but she also talked about the sense of wonder and how important that is. And so I want to spend a few minutes on this kind of health well-being topic in terms of the ability of natural systems to decrease anxiety and depression and to promote creativity and awe and be kind of a reservoir of health, both in the local and global community. And this has reached a new, kind of a new tipping point as mental illness has gone up a lot. It used to be higher in urban areas. It's going up now even in rural areas. And it's been declared a national emergency by multiple major pediatric associations. And I've been involved in a lot of these conversations. And what concerns me is most of the conversations among mental health professionals are that we need more services, we need more professionals, we need more funding. But I would like to make the case that we need more prevention. We need every tool in the toolbox to keep brains healthy and prevent mental illness. It's really important. Particularly teenagers and young people are very vulnerable to mental illness, which can then become a chronic, lifelong condition. And if you look at economic, worldwide economic value, preventing mental illness is one of the most financially beneficial things you can do because it's such a lifelong, challenging condition that affects the whole community. So it's just really, really important. And I think all of us have been touched by mental illness and friends or family and know how devastating it can be. Prevention is essential. Interestingly, I'd never seen this before in my life. There was a simultaneously published editorial in over 200 top medical journals a couple of years ago, September 2021. And all of these top medical journals said we need to, really get coordinated on how are we going to deal with the issue of climate, biodiversity, and health. And one of the conclusions of this paper, this editorial, is that nature has not received sufficient attention. So this was sort of striking, but most health professionals are not simultaneously trained in ecology. And that's the intersection between health and ecology is really critical. Some countries are further ahead than others on this issue. In Japan, they have 100 forests that are just solely dedicated for health benefits. And linking forests and health and brain health is rapidly advancing as a research topic. Most of the really, I think, interesting seminal work has not been done in the United States. It's been done in other countries. In the UK, they actually have a motto for the National Health System forest, growing forest for health. And I like this image, which shows that this is beneficial for all ages and for people of all abilities. At Harvard, I started to do a meta-analysis on forests and brain health to try and look at what are some of the known benefits. And some of the benefits where there's a lot of evidence and sufficient coordinated evidence for a meta-analysis is about anxiety, stress hormones, and blood pressure, which are all kind of baseline health measures that are really important. So I want to go through a few of the papers that I think are really impactful in this area. And as a neuroscientist, if I want to look at preventing or treating or curing any kind of brain condition, you want to look at effects that are lasting, not just a masking of symptoms. Most of our drugs for neurological disorders are really masking symptoms and not curing or reversing the disorder. So evidence for curing or reversing disorder could be a structural change or a long-term functional change, or setting the stage for that. So this paper was done in Berlin, and it talked about how do features of the environment translate to changes or correlate with changes in brain structure. And what they found when they basically coded the environment, and this evidence for changes in brain structure would be the kind of lasting change that I was talking about that could prevent a disease or modify a disease or reverse a disease, not just mask symptoms. And in Berlin, what they did is they coded the landscape to include forests, green urban areas like parks, urban areas, water, etc. And what they found, is that specifically people who lived within a kilometer of the forest had better structural integrity of their amygdala, which is an area of the brain that's known to be associated with kind of emotional well-being, emotional processing of information, and really a critical evolutionarily conserved brain area. So that I thought was very interesting about structural integrity of the brain. A study done recently in Italy found that there were fewer COVID-19 deaths in areas of Italy that have higher levels of forest bathing and forest cover. And what they think might be happening in this case is that there's an interaction between these volatile organic compounds that are emitted in the forest, primarily molecules called terpenes. They're found in conifers primarily, but a lot of other species too. And they think that there's an interaction between the spike protein, the COVID-19 spike protein, and these volatile organic compounds. So this relates to the, forests for health kind of idea. Are there forests that may be specifically beneficial for different conditions? And it's something that my colleagues and I have talked about at Trinity for a while. Like maybe if you have Parkinson's, is there a certain kind of forest you should specially go to? And I think that'd be a really interesting research area. I wanted to highlight a study done a couple of years ago that collated all the information on depression, which is really a very common condition. Any of us are prone to it at any time. And what causes depression and what causes lasting depression. And what they looked at were, what are all these kind of mechanisms in the brain? So changes in brain function, neuroplasticity, inflammation, epigenetics. This would be the kind of changes in gene expression that could mobilize long-term changes in brain function. What are the kind of issues in your sort of physical environment or your proximal contextual environment? So noise, pesticides, air pollution, or your neighborhood, your family, your friends, and how do kind of bigger picture things affect depression? So, are you worried about war, disasters, climate change, etc.? And I'm just going to highlight a couple of the conclusions from this study. They looked at for all of these things. What's the evidence for a mechanism? What's the evidence for the strength of the association? And one of the things that there's a very high level of evidence for being correlated with depression is air pollution. So it's very strongly associated with depression and a number of other neurological conditions. So air pollution is something, as we know, trees, plants, all of that is like extremely beneficial for air pollution. One of the things they found was also associated with depression is urban living. As I said, the rates have been going up even in rural areas now. But one of the things that was associated with less depression is time in and exposure to natural environments. So it's almost like this is a bulwark. It's a prevention against, for better structural integrity, for resistance to depression, potentially to, removing air pollution and preventing disease. And so it's not just depression, it's also other more serious types of mental illness like schizophrenia and other lasting and, serious mental illnesses. And I particularly like this paper about spending time in nature and self-reported rumination, so negative sort of self-talk, and brain activity. So what this study did is that had people go out for 90 minutes, either in a natural area or in an urban area, and just go for a walk and then report how they felt. And after the 90-minute nature walk, there was a significant decrease in rumination that was not found when they went out for a 90-minute walk in an urban area. So this is just their self-report. So you might say, well, okay. But what's really striking is they imaged their brains and looked at the brain area in the prefrontal cortex that's associated with rumination. And what they found was a match between the change in the blood flow in the prefrontal cortex and the self-report. So here we have a match between how people felt and reported and the actual changes that happened in their brain. So this would be the kind of thing that I think would be important to do over time, and then see what could be maybe the lasting changes that you could promote, which would then provide the kind of resilience and disease prevention that I'm talking about. And I'm not showing it today, but there was a study in Ireland where people went out in small groups to national parks over 13 weeks. And what they found in terms of these quantifiable depression scales, standardized instruments to measure this, is that after 13 weeks, where they just went out walking in these small groups, their improvement was akin to having met individually with a therapist twice a week for those 13 weeks. And you can imagine the cost of going out in a small group on a self-walk in a national park is vastly lower than twice a week individual sessions with a professional. During the pandemic, I did a little study with my students on heart rate variability, which is a measure of sort of resilience to stress, and a measure of kind of your autonomic nervous system resilience. And what we found, and what we did, is we walked in an urban area, and then there's a kind of deep forest by the river in Hartford that we went into. It's now being dedicated as the first community wild area in Hartford. And the students wore this heart rate monitor. And what we found is that as they transitioned into this forest, the change in peak coherence and the higher level is better, dramatically increased as we went into the forest, and then decreased again when they came out of the forest. So just like the rumination scores, could their overall coherence go up over time if they did this regularly? And this is an example from one student, but all of the students had a similar effect, although it wasn't always this dramatic as this one trace. There have been a number of papers and reports written about wild nature and special populations, like veterans and at-risk teens, and sort of an evolving science on the healing power of awe. So awe is the feeling that you have in the presence of something bigger than yourself. Awe promotes empathy, it promotes altruism, it promotes cooperation, it promotes all the things that we would want in our communities as we try to help each other and stick together, on bedrock values that we all agree on. So awe is something that's really important. And that's why I always emphasized, the power of mystery and beauty. And so nature is one of the most accessible and powerful ways to promote awe. And this was recognized as a fundamental value when they established this project called the Green Road Project at Walter Reed, which is a natural healing environment where, injured service members and their families can spend time. And it was set up purposefully to provide this kind of experience regularly and to study it. And some of the things that they studied are biomarkers of stress, natural language analysis. So how do injured service members express how they felt, and also changes in gene expression to that kind of long-lasting changes that I was talking about. And Dr. Frederick Foote, a neurologist retired from the Navy, he said, in this case, you just provide the nature and the mind takes care of the rest. So, from my sort of biomedical first do no harm perspective, these benefits of natural systems and nature really align with the principles of evidence-based medicine. People want nature, it's good for them, and it's something that we can provide for people. So it's really important to not lose sight of this as a fundamental piece of the puzzle as we all move forward. I want to highlight a place that I think is very special in Monterey, Massachusetts, it's called Gould Farm. It's been around for more than 100 years. It's a residential facility for people with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia primarily. People go and stay for usually 6 months to 2 years or so, and they work on the farm. It's a working landscape. Everyone has a job. You receive support from a psychiatrist and a social worker, but you're part of a community. You're not considered a patient. You're considered a guest. And everyone has expectations for work and contributing to the community. And it's just an incredible, respectful place that has healed many, many people. And one of the community values of the farm is not just their woodlot, their maple sugar operation, their agriculture, their cafe, all of that. But it's the connection to the place and to nature across generations. Because once you've been at Gould Farm, you're welcome there forever. And so when they did a landscape study of Gould Farm, of course, they have their areas for ag and their working woodlots and maple sugar and all of that. But they also have areas that are designated just for natural areas. And of course, it makes sense to protect core habitats and rare species. So there's very strategic decisions that need to be made about what we're doing where and why. I'm really proud that the first forest that was in Connecticut that was entered into the Old Growth Forest Network is a forest in Simsbury, Connecticut called Belden Forest. And it's very small. It's only 40 acres, but it's next to the Veterans Memorial. It's next to the library. It's on the bus line. And it's like a little oasis. And so that is intended to be a forest and a refuge for everyone, for the public, forever. And this means a lot to people. And someone wrote me recently that they brought he and his wife brought their children there to Belden Forest specifically because it was in the Old Growth Forest Network, because they knew it would be there and be someplace they could count on. The reason why they went there was to tell the children about a very serious terminal neurological condition that the mom has. And they wanted to tell their kids that in a place where their kids could go back and visit and feel that comfort. The founder of the Old Growth Forest Network has written a wonderful piece called Vitamin F. I'd recommend you look it up. It's available on the website at the Old Growth Forest Network, how forests are critical for human and for planetary health. I also wanted to mention that during COVID, my colleague Linda Tomaso, she's a visiting professor at Trinity and also in the School of Public Health at Harvard. She found that during COVID, feeling strongly nature deprived was worse than losing wages. And the only thing that was worse than being nature deprived was losing your job entirely. So this is something people are very sensitive to, and we don't need additional things that are making people mentally ill. So this was done in a standardized measure of what's called flourishing. And that's the take-home message, that nature deprived was worse than everything except for losing your job. So, back to the point about wildlands, what the report found is that even though New England is 80% forested overall, even the densely populated states are 60% forested, we only have about a little over 3% that's currently has a known wildlands intent. And only 2% of that has what's considered strong protection. In southern New England, the percent of the land that has strong protection for natural processes as a wildland is actually less than 0.3%. It's really scary. And some of the ways that we can kind of really think strategically about this are there areas that are currently natural areas where we can upgrade weak protection so we don't have an accident? We can try and add to and connect to these existing areas and start to identify ideal things on the landscape that need to be strongly protected. So our water resources, right now, there's no special protection for headwaters, for example, even though we know that's really important. What about our old forests? This is where the full complement of molecules and interactions can occur. Then we need these full areas for species migration and, their ability to kind of adapt and evolve. What are the special habitats that are special micro niches where special things live? It's really important we don't run them over accidentally. Making sure we connect these areas for wildlife, and also really be careful about areas that don't have particularly invasive plants. We don't want to introduce those. Invasive plants are just going across the landscape like a metastatic cancer, and we need to not introduce them wherever possible. And just start asking, how are we going to establish a strategic network of nature that benefits us and all species? So to kind of think about that, I just want to mention a few terms and names for stewardship of this kind of approach. So I mentioned wildland. Sometimes it's called a reserve. Wilderness. The Forest Service has a very specific definition for areas called research natural areas. In some states, it's called a natural area preserve. We also have our national parks or national preserves. Sometimes it might be called a sanctuary. And names for possible stewardship could be natural stewardship, natural area stewardship, proforestation, and natural succession. And so, as Susan mentioned in the beginning, I'm one of the authors of the paper on proforestation, which is about letting some forests grow, like we've been talking about, related to wildlands. And I just want to, I know that in some cases it's been misrepresented, saying that bans people or bans management or a bunch of other things, but that's not true. It's basically a term that fits into this other set of existing terms. But the point of writing the paper was to talk about a specific approach to try and maximize these values for the climate, for biodiversity, and also for health long term. So, my main kind of mission right now is to try and think about what is the strategic approach so we can use our resources for their highest and best use, and also protect this lifeline of nature that we all need. because forest ecosystems are essential to life on Earth as we know it. And the major international reports like the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Biodiversity Policy Group, they recently, for the first time, finally had a joint workshop, all concur on this. This sort of what's called jumping together of knowledge from multiple fields is called consilience. And this is really an international and interdisciplinary priority. It's not against anything or anyone, it's for everyone. So the final point I want to make is that life supports life. The point of life on Earth is to support itself. That's its job. That's why it's so good at it. It's not an accident that we live on this incredible paradise. Life itself has created this paradise, and its job right now is trying to stabilize this paradise for its future, which means our future. And also, our best future also depends on our individual and collective brain health. So I'm providing you my email, and I tried to leave about 15 minutes in case people have any questions. And I think I will stop sharing my screen. And I want to really thank you for your attention and for the invitation to speak to you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Massino. Do people have questions? I think we've got a small enough group that you can just raise your hands and unmute and ask your question. Ken.
Excuse me. I'm now retired. I've been a part of the Forest Service strategic planning process, the RPA assessment for many, many years. And I'm just pondering your thoughts about how these are fabulous and wonderful can be better included in something like the RPA strategic planning process. The way that process works is that there are kind of separate evaluations for maintaining, sustainability of water, wildlife, range, wilderness areas, carbon, economic benefits in the form of recreation, timber products, and so on. And the thing that tends to happen is that there are different locations in the country where certain of these values predominate. Of course, there are a great many wildland areas in the Western United States. There are many urban areas now that are, I should have mentioned too, urban areas, urban forests are explicit area for analysis. Just wondering if you had thoughts about how your perspectives could be included among all of these other values that are being evaluated by the Forest Service in their long-range strategic planning. Have you thought about that inclusion, which I had, it was just beginning to kind of surface as a topic of awareness as I was getting ready to retire, and I think now there's a great more there.
Yeah, thank you for that comment and point of view. So I tried, as part of the Science and Technology Working Group in Connecticut, we assembled an incredibly interdisciplinary team and then ran the team based on the principles of multi-solving, which is a term developed by Climate Interactive at MIT. And it requires kind of engaging the whole system in the conversation, and also requires diminishing conflicts of interest, and requires having people work across disciplines. So everyone that we picked, almost everyone, I wasn't in charge of everyone, but I tried to find people who had expertise across disciplines. So like a soil scientist who was also like a town planner, or there was a public health nurse who was also an attorney who worked for a clean water organization. And I think the more kind of democratic and interdisciplinary conversations we can have, the better. And I also, I basically said, you can't be part of this group if you're here to defend your own turf. We're trying to get to like, what are some optimal solutions? And then of course there's a host of political decisions layered onto that, but we have to get really quiet and really honest about what we don't know, how we don't have control groups for a lot of the experiments that we're doing. We have insufficient baselines or plans for data collection. We don't know that much about our soil, which is the bedrock of kind of everything. And so I think that as a neuroscientist, I'm extremely comfortable with knowing that there's a lot I don't know. And it really scares me that we are on a real rush to do things without really fully understanding what we're doing. So I would say, as a bedrock suggestion, we need, more data collection and control groups, and make sure that we're not, and use a medical model, really, like a triage system, that, you don't send people that are recovering or healthy to surgery. You kind of have to stratify your resources and your actions. So that's why I keep on trying to emphasize a strategic plan. And I don't think it's that difficult to come up with one that everyone would really agree on, if we could have the time and space for that conversation.
Great. Matt.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting and made me think of other things that I've read in the past. But I have two questions, if I may. One, I think, is easy. If you could just sort of describe what forest bathing means. And then the other is, I'm wondering, since we have an expert in the house, so to speak, is there a range of research on different kinds of natural areas that produce the effects that you were talking about? And I'm thinking in terms of things like, there's millions of people, maybe billions of people around the world who live in urban settings with pretty low access to extensive natural areas, but probably have some access, say, to parks, which are less obviously engulfing you, but also other kinds of settings, like being on the seashore, I think is very recharging for some people. Where I grew up in Southern California, some of the very arid landscapes I found awesome in the literal sense, not the 1980s sense or whenever that came to mean just good. So I wonder, is there any indication in the literature that it's more than just greenness, or whatever it is you want to say are the characteristics of a forest?
Sure. So first, your question was about forest bathing and what does that mean? And it really just means it doesn't involve water. It just really means being in the forest and taking in the sights and the smells. And you could be moving, you don't have to be moving. And it evolved from a practice in Japan called Shinrin-yoku. So that's the Japanese word that means forest bathing. And so when I mentioned the anxiety and stress hormones and blood pressure benefits, they've been doing it in Japan for long enough that there have been sufficient kind of similar groups and studies that they were able to combine this into a meta-analysis and say, yes, for sure, these are benefits of forest bathing. In terms of specific forests having specific health benefits, I mentioned the terpenes and the COVID-19, and, potentially there could be different types of forests that might have special benefits. And people are always asking, well, what is it? What's the mechanism? This is always the question, because we always want to think about like puzzles, like what's the exact piece? I really think that it's not one thing. It's the combination of things, and that's part of the power. Yes, other landscapes are also beneficial. I mean, I've focused on forests because it's the most biodiverse terrestrial ecosystem. It's, obviously we're storing so much carbon on the land, both above and below the ground. So it has these kind of extra benefits. And then in terms of evidence for those extra benefits, there was a big study, once again, not in the United States, it was in the UK, that looked at teenagers and what was the benefits of different types of landscapes. So sort of similar to the one I showed in Berlin that showed the structural integrity of the amygdala. And in this case, they found that for teenagers, it was cognitive benefits and kind of emotional regulation, which is a big kind of resilience, kind of mental health measure, that the benefits of, they called it woodlands, the benefits of woodlands were higher than green spaces, which were like parks. So I think this could give us something to really think about in terms of, we are often talking about green spaces, right? As everyone needs access to green spaces, but what are those green spaces? There's definitely a big difference in quality, perhaps, of what are the combined benefits of what these green spaces are providing. And should pieces of our parks, be devoted to more little kind of wild areas, like in Central Park, there's like the Ramble, like in Olmsted Parks, there's often a wild area. Like in Keeney Park, the 10-mile woods is an extensive old forest in Hartford. Another study looked at, it was a big study, thousands and thousands of people. It looked at a birth cohort, and it stratified kids when they entered into kindergarten based on their zip code, zip code of birth. And what they found on this standardized test for when kids came into kindergarten in terms of their social development, skills, like a whole big kindergarten something inventory. They found that higher tree cover was significantly associated with better scores on basically every measure in the kindergarten cohort. So that's not, a deep forest necessarily, but it's getting at that value that you were asking about, like what are the different kinds of landscapes and what are the benefits they can provide. Did I answer both of your questions? I think so.
Yeah. Sorry, I think so. I was also just kind of curious about landscapes that we just don't think of as lush at all. We would go out to Joshua Tree, say, in California, which is I know it's a national forest, but it's not what most of us think of when we say forest, that sort of thing.
Well, I think nature of any type has, benefits and the power to provoke awe. It doesn't have to be a forest. I mean, landscapes are just so beautiful. And that was what Olmsted was really, he had two kinds of landscape styles that he tried to promote. One was the picturesque and one was the pastoral. And so one is related to kind of this, perhaps evolutionarily, affiliation towards like a savanna or open type landscapes, right? And then there are other landscapes that you maybe have a more intimate connection to.
Robert, Alan.
Yes, real quick. Susan, I didn't catch all of your email. Could you repeat that or show it again, please?
Oh, sure. Maybe want me to type it in the chat?
Either way, whatever works.
And I'm easily Googleable at Trinity College.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sort of wondering about one of the things you just said about the study on the zip code and what they were like coming into kindergarten. And we've been talking about tree equity scores some here. And so yes, it correlates with the amount of tree cover, but that correlates a lot with, income and a lot of other socioeconomic factors. So is that just a correlation then where, tree cover is one of the factors that may be influencing their readiness? But there are a lot of other factors as well.
So this was done in the UK. So I'm
Mhm.
not as familiar with the tree equity database in the UK as, I'm familiar with the measures that you're talking about, particularly in Connecticut. But I do think that they controlled for that. I would have to look back. I have a slide on that study, but it was done in the United Kingdom.
Maybe a regression study. Okay. Well, anyone else? I mean, we've got 3 minutes before our hour is up.
Lightning round.
Paul.
So going through my mind here was actually, I hate to say it, but more on the negative side with high density forests and looking at communities where there's a lot of homelessness and things like that. Have you seen anything where forestry types of situations create a negative situation? I 100% agree, and I've got my mind is going all the people I can share your presentation with. So, but how do we deal with or answer the question of, gee, we plant all these trees and it's a great place for homeless people to hide out or things like that?
Well, I haven't actually. Most of the problems in the urban forest that I'm familiar with is more with trash, and also with, as in any forest that's heavily trafficked, invasives tend to be along the trail in particular, and there's, kind of been an insufficient focus on removing these things that are harmful for multiple reasons. So it's mostly been invasives and trash. There has been some camping or whatever, people have been kind of had to move out there, but it hasn't been a major problem. It's been sort of an isolated incident here or there.
Okay, so our time is basically up, and I want to thank Dr. Massino for this great presentation. And so have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And Susan, I'll see you Thursday at the Beaver Pond film. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.